It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what can be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you found us online, maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and if you would, just leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would do that, it just takes a moment. We would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, having a purpose, having an identity, having a schedule, and then shutting it off on a random Friday without methodical steps to living what we would call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we wrap up our series on optimizing retirement. Today, we talk about being an image bearer. The most important thing you can do in retirement is live a life that reflects the nature of your Creator. In this podcast, Ben explains what retirees can do to make God smile, as well as have the most impact and fullness in life and retirement. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back. We are continuing this mini-series on optimizing retirement, and today we are going to wrap up this mini-series on episode, I think, 8 or 9 of it, and we're going to talk about being an image bearer, and this is going to be kind of a wrap-up of the last 7 or 8 episodes. So we've got a great show on tap for you today. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, before we get started, just a reminder, we got a brand new Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. If you're on Facebook, join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed. We've got Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions, all to come. Go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed. Again, this is a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. So go check that out. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here, Ben, and that is really kind of what this is all about. In fact, if I could summarize, and we're going to do much more of that here in the show today, but if I could summarize this whole series on optimizing retirement, it's really to make it different. It's to make it better. It's to make it as best as it can be. And the things that we've kind of discovered is that, you know, this isn't just for retirees. This is for life in general. In fact, I mean, you could even go as far to say, if you want to make your retirement great, you've got to make your life great, no matter what stage of the game you're in. And that's a major takeaway that I've come to over the past several weeks.
Yeah, it is. And you and I are talking before the show, like we always do. It's like, what can we say specifically? How can we communicate to people listening to this to get them to make a change? And that doesn't mean you have to. Maybe you're listening and say, hey, I'm living repurpose. I'm doing exactly what you're saying. You're preaching to the choir here. But some of you I know are listening to this, and it's like, oh, that's a neat message. We talk about it all the time. It's like, oh, people might say it's just a neat message. Yeah, I agree. But are you doing anything with it? So what types of messaging can we bring to make sure people are actually taking what we're talking about and doing it?
Yeah, I think if you're a thought leader, you create content, you author books, you have coaching programs, you've got classes you've created. Really, when you are that type of person, I feel like that's what, we fit in that category, and you're trying to create change in somebody's life. Nobody has ever read your book that I've heard and read it and said, you guys are just like you're off in left field. I mean, the things that you're talking about they're just not real. I mean, everybody who comes across our message says, man, that's a great message, but it's frustrating as a content creator and a coach when you hear it and you get that reaction. What you want is people to say like, oh my goodness, this made me look at everything differently. And I would agree with that, Ben. A lot of the conversations we have as we prepare for shows are really like, what is the message we can bring to the masses today that's going to make that shift? And that's really what burns us more than anything.
Yeah, and if you hear like these last few shows, we're talking through, why is it important? Well, because so many people miss out. Society misses out. Like last show, we talked about the quote about like, it is a it's a requirement. Like we need retirees to be active in their community. We need to be active in their families, not necessarily stepping aside and letting young people just step into leadership roles. We need them because, again, they're that tie to the greatest generation. They're that tie to really the way that, in my mind, people. I'm gonna say it. People that are in their 60s and they're in their 70s. This group that we're talking to in their 50s, when they were growing up. The world was a better place. I believe that in many ways. So the way that we talk to each other, the way that we interact with our neighbor, the way that we everything that we can see lately. I think some technologies cause some major problems with all that. Yeah. But I think they grew up in a time and a world where things were different. And I think things can be better, but I think we need that group of retirees just step up and lead, because otherwise we all miss out.
Yeah. I would agree with you. I do think that certainly retirees were raised in a world different than our generation, Ben. We kind of fall into that real, early Gen X, that's kind of where we fall. We're kind of speaking to baby boomers here, but, we grew up in a different time than what our parents certainly grew up in. And I think as the world kind of changes, in many regards to the worse, or maybe gets darker in some ways and shifts in kind of what you would consider a bad direction, I feel like retirees fit into two categories. They either kind of go numb, where they just want to, I don't want to say isolate themselves from other people, but they just kind of want to isolate themselves from all the chaos of the world. I'm just going to go do my thing, and I'm just going to focus on me, and I'm going to kind of not necessarily hide out like physically, but just kind of hide out from the world. And then the other side is that people get really angry. I've seen a lot of retirees and they are very vocal about all the problems of the world. They have no problem, sharing opinions, political opinions, spiritual opinions. And, I appreciate the fervor that they have, but I almost challenge them, gently to say, what if you took that energy and instead of taking that to a conversation with a family member or friend, like, why don't we just focus on the things we can focus on? Focus on the controllables. Focus on the positive things. I can't control world politics. I can't even control hardly the politics in my state other than voting. But, take that energy and let's make it useful. This is the time where we should be having the most impact and be that light that we always talk about.
Yeah, to make a difference in somebody around us, to make a contribution. We talked about that in several shows about what's important in our daily lives while we're working. Most of us at the end of the day want to feel like we're making a contribution. We're doing something for somebody else. So in retirement, it becomes a little bit of a challenge because, again, you don't have your normal day job that I'm interacting with people. I'm producing something where I can see that contribution. So again, the contribution starts to look very different in retirement. If we do it right, it has to be you have to be focusing on creating the contribution. Otherwise, you're just existing.
Yeah. Well, again, you're just kind of, I wouldn't say perpetuating the problem, but doing nothing about it. We can talk about problems all day long. I think a great antidote to dealing with problems is, like you just said, contribute. And I would also say be thankful. Thankfulness and contribution, that alone is a huge antidote to depression, feeling like you're in a slump, feeling like you're not walking really in the flow of life. If you just did that and started days with that, your outlook on the day would shift. And again, coming back to why are we even talking about this and starting with today's show with this, it's to try to get people to kind of wake up, so to speak, make the change, understand how important their life is, understand how important retirement is, and how important every season of life is.
Yeah, and what people find when they do that, when they do find ways to contribute, when they find ways to, add value to others, their downtime, the permanent vacation becomes that people talk about with retirement. It's my permanent vacation. Those times become that much better because you look forward to that real rest. You look forward to enjoying that time each and every day. Yep. Every day shouldn't look like the Saturdays of old, right? Saturdays of old should not be part of a retiree's normal weekly schedule because a Saturday of old, back when you're working, was preceded by, 5-6 days of hard work, right? So your weekends were earned by the work. So we just want to make sure people are plugging in, they're contributing, and still continuing to stay relevant because we need them.
Last week's show, we talked about reverse engineering this life of optimization. And again, we have so many episodes. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes. I say that at the start of every single show, but make sure you do that. Go back and listen to some of these shows. We started with the ant and the grasshopper like 2 months ago, Ben, and that has kind of built into talking about ways to find meaning, understanding the different seasons of your life. We talked about making your life in retirement not about the numbers. We talked about the value of memories. That was a great show. We discussed prosperity, and I think that's going to come into today's show, so we'll kind of save that. But, last week we used this quote from a guy by the name of Taylor Welch, and he said, "Our greatest contributions to the world around us are made during our happiest and most blissful moments of our existence. Therefore, we have a moral obligation and duty to engineer those moments as frequently and as routinely as we can," end quote. That's from Taylor Welch. That's why we talked about this reverse engineering. It's not just so that you can have the happy moments. That is a byproduct. That's the thing, you don't have to try to be happy. Being happy is the byproduct of the process and the daily life of living in kind of this word that we've used, alignment to how God created us. And that really is kind of the essence of life that we're getting at here.
Yeah, and today, what's been on my heart as we walk through all of these, as we talk about retirees and we talk about living in alignment with who God created us to be, I keep coming back to this idea of who did God create us to be, right? So there's skills and talents we all have, but there's something more than that.
Right.
There's something more that God created to be, and really, what I think we have to remind people is you were created to be an image bearer of God. You were created as His image bearer.
Yeah, I think this whole idea of being an image bearer, that really is the being part, which we touched on that last week. To really be in that state is something that you have to understand something about yourself. But it's going to be hard to do that if you don't understand this concept of really this image bearer mentality.
So, Jerry, I was listening to a sermon recently from Mark 12. Where it's that section where it talks about paying taxes to Caesar. And the Pharisees had come to Jesus, and they asked him the question. They said, "Teacher, we know you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the truth of God in accordance with the truth. Is it not right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" And of course, if you follow through the rest of that passage, Jesus, of course, you're amazed by his wisdom. When he comes back, he says, "Bring me one of the coins. Bring me a coin. Whose image is on that coin?" And of course, the Pharisees say, "Well, it's Caesar's." And he replies, "Well, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's and to God what is God's." And in this sermon, I'm listening as pastor, and I'm going to what happens next. I'm kind of like, okay, so the Pharisees, you would think, would say, okay, well then, Jesus, what do we give to God?
Well, what do we give to him? Huh?
And they don't. It just says they were amazed and they went away. And this pastor said, well, I think that's because they didn't want to hear the answer.
Right.
And I think many times we don't want to hear that answer either, right? The answer is, right, if we go back into Genesis, right, and we go back to many times in Scripture where it talks about we are created in God's image, right? So you go back to Genesis 1:26. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, right? And then later, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. So when we read that and we think, what do we give to God? It's all of us.
Right.
We are created in his image. And I think for me, when I listened to that, I started to go down like, that's a message I want retirees today to hear.
Right.
It's like, what does that mean to be an image bearer of Christ?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great message. I never looked at it that way, but yeah, if you look at this piece of currency, give that to Caesar, give the others the stuff that has God's marking on it. That's what you give to him. That's a really interesting way to look at that story. I do think that, we've tried to come up with ways to inspire people to live and to really experience God's fullness. Of course, this you could call this show a faith-based show. I would disagree. It just so happens that we talk a lot about faith. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know how you would get away from that fact. I don't know how to tell people, like, if you're going to have the best life in retirement, I don't know how to not give them this scenario, because it doesn't, what else can you come up with? Vacation more, have more stuff, have more money. I mean, we talked about the value of memories. They're phenomenal, but there's always going to be the next thing. There's always going to be something that doesn't truly fulfill. And so I think you're onto something here, because if you don't have that and don't understand that and reflect being God's image, there's always going to be this disconnect in your life, whether you're retired or younger.
Yeah, we can talk about how we utilize the talents, the skills, about how God made us, right? But unless we're using those in order to be an image bearer of Him,
right.
I look at, well, if I want to be in living in that, in Christ's image, then what did He do? I look back at how did Christ live? So I look at that and say, well, He served. He served every single day. He washed His disciples' feet, right? He made the ultimate sacrifice on the cross. He loved everyone, right? That's a hard thing to hear today.
No.
He loved everyone. And when you hear that and you think, so how do I live in Christ's image, and how do I do that in retirement? You start to looking back at how He lived, right?
Yeah, I think that is certainly that is the foundational piece, without a shadow of a doubt. I would go on to say, I think there's something everybody is uniquely made for, called to, and that's what makes life really exciting. We kind of have this foundational understanding. Yes, we have to be an image bearer and do the things that He did, but that looks uniquely different from a tactical level. Each and every one of us has a little bit of a different calling to fulfill a greater purpose and a greater calling. That to me is the exciting part of life that doesn't cease to exist at any point in time in life until the absolute end.
Yeah, Jared, something that I've been taking notice of lately, and we're thinking about this whole image bearer thing, is I'm looking at my daughters and watching how they're somewhat image bearers of me. Right, it's super interesting. My one daughter, it's the craziest thing. She has my wife's hands, like almost identical, but she has one thumb on her right hand that is exactly like mine. I'm not kidding. This is something that we oftentimes, she'll smile and she'll kind of give me a thumbs up and like, yeah, that's your thumb, Dad. She's made in my likeness. My other daughter, my younger daughter, has my exact hands. Like we're sitting there, we're looking down, and like every curve, every little lifeline, like everything on my hand, it looks exactly like hers, and it's so cool. So I look at my girls and I'm thinking, if I can watch them do something that is extraordinary, I can watch them do something that hopefully they've done in my image, something that they've seen me do, and they can do that, and it just makes me smile. Something positive for somebody around them, or they say something, I'm like, man, they're getting it, right? I want our retirees, I want our lives, and that's not just retirees, that's any human being. I want our lives, again, to be reflecting our image bearer of Christ, right? So again, let's get back to how did He live? The types of things He did in His sacrifice and His service to others.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's kind of a full circle thing, right? It's not just a one-way street. It's like you've got your daughters and you're seeing them, essentially bearing the image of you. You're watching them do great things as they're turning into young adults. That makes you smile. That makes them fulfilled. They're utilizing the specific kind of uniqueness of themselves in their own unique way, and it's kind of this full circle thing. Marriage is the same way. I do find that the correlations between marriage and faith, where there's this connection, there's this oneness. The more I pour into my wife, the more fulfillment she has, and vice versa. And it goes right. It's the same. It's kind of the same thing. And we've already talked about kind of what does make God smile. And so that's really the point of this show. And Ben, just kind of to reiterate, this whole idea of what we called optimizing retirement, in essence, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and if you're going to optimize retirement, it will involve you looking like the image bearer of Christ. It will involve some level of service. It will involve you utilizing your talents. What makes you unique. I love looking at my kids, Jerry. I love looking at them and saying, you are so different from your sister.
Right.
You know, daughter number one, I'll be like, Lauren, this is the way you are.
Yeah.
And then I look at Addie and I'm like, you guys are so different.
Yep.
You created, yes, in God's image. Yes, you have some of my physical characteristics, and luckily for them, more of my wife's. But I like looking at, how God made them different, and then starting to think forward. How are they going to use their uniqueness to better serve God?
We've got about 3 to 4 minutes left. That kind of wraps up this whole series. But as we start kind of a new mini-series next week, Ben, let's just talk about that for a second. There are specific things that every single person has. And just recently we had a group of high school kids in the office here, and they were just kind of learning about business and entrepreneurship, and it was fun to talk to them. And we kind of said some of the things we've said on this show, where it's like, really, for you to walk in your fullness, you've got to understand how you are uniquely created, and then engineer your life so you're doing more of that. So part of this process of being an image bearer is, yes, do the things that Christ did, like you mentioned. Know that is the foundation of this idea of not only optimizing retirement, for crying out loud, living in fullness in life, but there's a big caveat to this. You got to understand who you are. How are you supposed to become Ben or John or Sally or Nancy if you don't know who that is? And there's a massive branch to this, or caveat to this, where we've got to do some introspective looking at kind of our personalities. And that's the beautiful thing about God too. He's very creative and kind of the personalities he's created as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like my daughters, their personalities could not be more different.
Yeah,
right?
Mine too.
When we work with retirees, we see all kinds of different personalities. And I've been doing this for 20 years, meeting with retirees. And what I have noticed is that retirees and people, we have certain category types. Like not everybody's the same, but there's certain things there's certain types of characteristics of personalities that people make decisions a certain way. We find that we really do very well in society if we watch out for certain things. So what we want to do is break that down for a listener and say, okay, if you're this type of person, we're going to walk you through some things in retirement to watch out for, right? We're going to look at different personality types. So if we're going through this next series and you're like, well, that's not my personality type, that doesn't mean skip to the one that is, right? Because there's people in your life that are the other personality type, and we want you to understand them kind of the way we do, right? And how you can bring another retiree up to where you are in this repurposed walk.
And you might actually be married to another person that is a different personality type. And ironically,
always a different personality type.
It's exactly like you just, one's hot, one's cold. I mean, that's the easiest one. I think every married person can relate to that. But one thing that we're going to talk about is that, certain personality types will operate not under stress this way. When they're stressed and pushed, they're gonna default to another. They're just gonna default to something different. Well, that's a big deal when it comes to retirement. It depends. That changes how we look at relationships. It changes how we look at our fulfillment. It's going to change how we look at what we do with our time. It's going to change how you view money. And all of these things need to be kind of balanced as the ebbs and flows of life happen. So this next series is going to be fun, but I also think really valuable for people as well.
Yeah, if we can start with this, knowing that we're created in God's image. Yes, even though people are very different than you, they have even your spouse, right? A very different way they look at life. That's if we can understand that, if we can understand more about the people we live with, more about the people in our community and even the world, that will help us, right? Be able to get along with people better and be able to certainly make a difference in our communities that much more.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this episode and series on optimizing retirement. This idea of being an image bearer, it's the foundation of what it means to live with purpose. And I think many times people think that their life is going to be drastically different just because they're retired and they have removed work out of their life equation. But it doesn't work that way. But the good news is that you have a choice. You can start living with purpose right now, regardless of your age. In fact, we recommend you do that because the earlier you do it, the easier it will become later in life. Need more help? Check out Repurposed University. It's a 5-lesson class taught by Ben Tejas and myself. Or you can get a copy of Ben's book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America. You can go to our website, retirerepurpose.com, or you can email me directly at Jared, Jerrid, at retirerepurpose.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.